Hey, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're actually going to take a look at sending a push request to create our user, using our create user form. So let's get straight into it. So up until now, we've only been sending get requests. So what we actually need to do now this time is actually send a push request. So if you watch my video, what is an API, in the SwiftUI iOS take home test course that I'm actually doing right now, that's what course this video is a part of. We actually go into detail about what a push request is, but essentially now, rather than receiving data and mapping it like we do here in our network manager, we want to do the opposite and actually send data and let it tell us if it was successful. So let's actually first off start by just looking at our networking manager and see what we need to refactor. So if I just go inside of our network manager, you'll see that we currently have one function called request, and it takes a type that you want to map it to and a completion where if it passes and fails, as well as the URL. So this function right now only handles a get request by default. So what we want to do is we actually want to write some code where we want to allow the ability to send a push request. Now, I don't want to mix and match and create a huge function inside of here that handles both get and post. Instead, I actually want to separate them out independently. So what we're going to do is create a new function in our networking manager for our push request logic. So let's create a new function in our networking manager, and we'll call it request also, but this time it won't actually accept a type. It will just basically give us a completion handler where the result for success is void. So let's just close this off. And then underneath this, we'll say request, and then we'll just copy it where we say absolute URL, completion, all right, cool. So when you actually look at these two functions, they are similar, and that's because we're actually following a concept that I mentioned in my previous video about generics within this course, and that's called method overloading. So what that is when you actually have two functions that are named the same, but they behave differently. So the reason why we've done that is because, like I said before, we want this request function to essentially tell us when we make a request to map it to some kind of type. But with this request function, we just want it to tell us if the request was successful within a range of status codes. So one more thing that we actually need to do now is actually move our logic from this request function into this one and actually implement that logic where we check to see if you're within the status code. We just want to return a void success. So let's just take the contents of this function, and then we'll just go and paste it within here like so, and we'll just start refactoring it a bit. So we don't really want to do any kind of decoding, so this we can actually take out, and we don't really care for checking to see if the data is invalid. We only really care about the status code logic here. Cool. So now what we need to do is actually communicate that if you reach this point, because the status code was in a valid range, we want to just send back a completion with a success of void. So after the guard statement, we just want to do completion and then success. And then within the success, we need to pass in void. Now you can specify void by just simply just having an open and close parentheses like so. So now we actually have that in place, but we actually still have a problem here. We're not explicitly telling our URL request within here that we want it to be, allow or, be some type of post request or get request. By default, it's just going to default to the get request method. But what we do want to do is we want to basically be able to actually pass in to this function to tell it to execute a push request. So in order to resolve this, what we want to do is create a enum that allows you to specify the different method types and pass that via the request function. So underneath here, we're going to create an extension on our networking manager, and then we're going to have an enum where it's going to be method type. And then within this enum, we're just going to specify a case of get and another case of post like so. Okay, cool. So now we have the available methods types that we're going to be working with. And in the future, if you're going to expand this, all you need to do is just literally add in all the different method types and then, just write your logic from there. So let's actually use this method type within our request function. So we just scroll all the way to the top. You'll see here that what we want to do is that within here, we want to actually pass in and allow you to specify what type of request you want to send. So after this URL, well, before I should say, we're going to add in another parameter here called method type. And then we're going to specify it's going to be method type. And now what I want to do is that by default, I actually want it to be a get request, so you don't have to specify it all the time. And then what you can do if you want is actually change the method type to the one that you need. So now that we've done that, we also want to apply that change to our other request function. So let's just go here and copy that same change again. So method type. So now we actually have these method types within our function signatures, we're able to actually update our request to now specify the type of request that we want to send. So in order to do that, let's change this from let to var. And then we're going to just simply have a switch statement on our method type. And then if it's a get request, then we're going to set the HTTP method to be get. And if it's a post request, then we're going to set it to be post, like so. But now we actually have a bit of a problem. So the problem we have now is that I actually don't want to repeat this again for the function below. It would, it's going to be quite tedious. And also as well, if I make a mistake here in the future, I now need to update in like multiple places. What we actually should do is actually write some kind of like function or logic that basically helps almost extract this out and build the request for us. So we're going to do that by just going down, and then we're going to actually create a private extension with its own private function. Now the reason why I'm making this a private extension is because I actually don't want this function to be exposed from outside of the networking manager. It's something that only this class should be aware of. So let's just mark this as private extension on network manager. And then within this extension, we're going to create a new function called build request. So now we have a function that takes in a URL and a method type, and depending on this, it will actually build up a URL request for us. So we simply just want to copy the code that we wrote here. So let's copy this, and then we simply just want to paste that within here like so, and then we just want to return the request that we have within the scope of this function like so. Cool. So all of our logic in terms of building up the request will be done within this function here. So now we just need to use this within our actual request functions. So rather than having this var request, we want to change that to let request, and then we also want to change this to be build request from URL, and the method type should be this, and we don't actually need this logic anymore like so. Cool. So if we wanted to, we actually could actually directly use this function in line within this here. The reason why I'm not doing that is because it can get a bit unreadable, and I just want to make this readable for this video. So let's just copy this now, and then we simply just want to use that here as well. Cool. So now we actually have it where if you're using this networking manager class, you can actually send a post request or get request and have the type mapped from the response if you wanted to. Or alternatively, you could have it where you send a post and get request, but only get back a success if the request falls within a valid status code. So you've got similar behavior, but you now have that flexibility where you don't have one big massive function. You just have the same functions, that same name functions that perform different things. So now we actually need to see how we can actually send some data to the API. So in order to achieve this, we're going to actually need to create a brand new model within our create folder. So let's go into our create folder. And then within here, the models folder, we want to create a new model. And because we're going to be sending a new person, I'm just going to call this model new person. Cool. And then within this struct, what we're then going to do is actually mark our model with the Codable protocol so that it can convert it from and to data. So let's just say struct and then new person. Cool. Now it's worth noting as well that if you wanted to, you actually don't need to use Codable as well, because we're only going to be using this for actually sending data and not actually mapping it to data. We actually could mark this as encodable and it would still work, because encodable is what you use to actually, convert a struct or some kind of object to data. And you can actually check that out in a video where I discuss Codable a bit more. So now we need to actually add in the properties that our screen is going to bind to and actually send to the service. Now if you look at our create view, you'll notice that we actually have a first name, last name, and a job. So we're going to define these as properties within our new person. So let's go into our new person and we're going to create our first name, and then we're just going to say our last name, and then finally we're just going to say our job. Cool. So we've basically got these empty strings in here because when you actually create a brand new person, we want the first name, last name, and job to be empty, which is why these have a default value of nothing, just an empty string. So now we have our model in place. The next thing is to actually create our view model that will actually bind this new person to the view model and actually use it to send it off within requests. So in our view models folder within the create folder, let's create a brand new one called create view model. So within here, we want this to be a class that is marked with the observable object protocol, and actually need a publish property to actually bind the changes from our text field to this new person, and we can use that to send in a request. So let's just actually type this out. So we'll go to final class and then create view model. It's going to be of type observable object, and then we want to create a publish property called new person. Actually, we'll just say person, and then this is going to be a new person, like so. Cool. Now one thing to note is that I've not actually specified that I want this to be private set, and the reason why is because we actually do want the view to be able to make changes to this property via a binding. And if you want to learn more about bindings, you can check out my video in the SwiftUI sessions playlist all about bindings. Within our create view model as well, we also want to add in a function to allow someone to actually create a new person. So let's create a empty function signature called create for now, and we'll write the logic out for actually sending it off to the service later on. So let's create an instance of this view model within our view. So if we go into our create view, just below your environment, you actually want to create an instance using the state object property wrapper. Okay, cool. And then within this view, now that we have this in place, we actually want to bind those properties within our struct to each one of these text fields. So you just scroll down, rather than having constant strings on our first name, last name, and job, instead we want to actually bind it to the properties within our struct. So we're going to say vm dot person dot first name, and then we're going to copy the same thing for the last name. I'm just going to copy and paste this because I'm lazy. And then we're going to do the same thing here for job, like so. Cool. Sweet. So now whenever someone actually types within these properties, it will update our person, model via the binding from our view model. So we also want to do it as well where we actually, create a person when you tap on the submit button. So rather than having the to do action here, we just want to replace this with vm.create. So now when you tap on the button, you'll actually call the create function. So we actually have a bit of a problem here if you've actually not realized it. And although we call the function to actually create a person, we actually don't have a way to directly pass through our new person into our networking manager, because if you actually look at our create view model, obviously we don't have it implemented, but we need a way to actually pass this person through to the network manager to actually attach it to the body of the request. Now, one way we can do that is by essentially having it where in our network type, you can actually pass through some kind of data. So what we're going to do is within our networking manager, we need to update our method type to accept data. So when you specify what type of request you want to make, you can actually pass through some kind of data with it when you're trying to send some kind of object. So let's just make this have an associated value of data. And we'll also make it optional in case you don't want to send anything through. So we need to update our build request function to actually attach this data to the request that gets made. So in our request here, underneath our HTTP method, we want to say request.http body is equal to the data. So let's access that by getting the associated value from the enum case like so, and then we'll simply just say data like so. Cool. So now we've got a way to actually link the data that we want to send with our request to the request body, for the request that's made to the API surface. So we can actually now start to write the code to essentially create and see that link in action. So let's go into our create view model. And then the first thing we actually want to do here is actually convert our person into some data using the JSON encoder that we actually used in the use with the topics that we discussed in the Codable video within this course. So I'm just going to type this out and then we'll break it down. And then now that we've done this, where it will actually try to convert our person into data, we can now simply just call our networking code to actually execute the request. So let's do that now. So after here, we're just going to say networking manager, and then we're going to say .shared .request. And then now you'll see that we have all these different possibilities. So we actually want the one where the result is void like so. So this first one. And then the method type is going to be post. And then the data is going to be this data that we tried to encode. And then the URL is going to be the string of our API. So let's just type this out. And then our completion is just simply going to be the result that we get back from the service. So we're going to say res in. And then we want to make sure that with the response that we get back from the service, we actually place this onto the main thread so that if we do any kind of UI updates, it is handled on the main thread and not a background thread. So we're going to say dispatch queue.main async. Cool. And then for now, we're just going to simply just, get the result, and then we're just going to get the success and the failure, but we're just going to call break. We're not actually going to do anything with the success or the failure for now. Cool. All right. So now we have everything that we need to actually handle sending data to the service. Sweet. So one thing that we need to do now is when you actually create a person and you submit it and it's all good, right now we don't actually have any code to automatically just dismiss the screen, because we don't want to have it where you tap submit, it sends a request and you still stay on the create screen. We want it to automatically dismiss itself. Now in order for us to do that, what we need to do is actually create some kind of state for our view to essentially listen to. So within our create view model, what we're going to do is actually create some kind of submission state that we can use for our form to know what is going on. So in here, we're going to say extension and then create view model. And then this enum is going to be submission state. And then it's going to be unsuccessful and then successful. Cool. So now we've got it where we have a submission state where we can make we can communicate back to the view that the state of it is unsuccessful or it is successful. So we're going to need to create a publish property that our view can listen to. So let's do that now. So within here, we're going to say at publish, and then this is going to be a private set var state submission state, and then we're just going to mark this as optional for now, because by default it's actually going to be nil, so it doesn't actually have a submission state at all. But what we do need to do is, depending on if there was success or failure, we actually want to set our submission state to either be, you know, successful or unsuccessful. So let's remove this break. And now, because we're referencing self within the closure, we need to mark this with weak self. And then rather than this being break here, we want to say self.state is equal to successful, because everything was okay. And then here we want to say self.state is equal to unsuccessful, like so. Cool. So to actually tie this up now, what we need to do is actually tell our view to listen to the onChange of our view model state. So we can actually do that by using the onChange modifier, and this will tell us whenever a value changes and we receive a new value and react to those changes. So you can learn more about this in my video about the SwiftUI lifecycle changes in the SwiftUI sessions playlist. Let's actually add this to our create view now. So within our create view, after our toolbar, we just simply want to say on change of, and this is going to be our view model dot state. We now get our new value. So within our new value, we want to check to see if the state of it is successful. Then we want to call dismiss. But to make this a bit clearer, we're going to say form state, and then we're going to say if form state is equal to successful, then call the dismiss function. Cool. So now whenever our form changes to be a successful submission, it will automatically dismiss itself because we listen to the changes. And because we marked our state with private set, you're actually not able to make changes to it from outside of that, you know, view model. Cool. So let's actually just see this in action. So if we go into our people view, so we actually just run this in our SwiftUI preview. So you should see your people, and it's now, you know, making the get request because we, you know, specify that's the default type of request we want to make. So you hit the plus button, you now should see the create form. So we just put some information here. I'm just gonna put any old random stuff. And now if you hit submit, you'll now see that it automatically dismisses itself and the request was made successfully. So this actually works great, and now we've actually got this working, that's all good. But something that we don't actually have is the feedback when something goes wrong. So if we actually, you know, go into our create form, and I'm just going to do it on my side now where I actually turn off the internet. So let's just turn off the internet. If I just put in some random information and then hit submit, we don't have any feedback to tell us that, hey, you know, you're not connected to the internet or something's gone wrong. So in our next video, let's actually look at how we can actually handle error handling with, you know, network requests in SwiftUI, so that our application will give us some proper feedback. So that's everything in this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, as well as leaving any comments in the comment section below with any feedback. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and hit notification bells to get updates for whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you in the next video. Deuces.